Sorry about that. A little loud there, okay. This is our open meeting for TXNORML. We want to thank everybody for coming out. I am James Spencer. I am legal counsel for TXNORML. We've got lots of board members here tonight. I see Cheyenne, and Jax, and Bridget, and Vincent, and Dave, and Topher was here, and I'm missing some others if you want to shout out names, but just by show of hands, is this anybody's first time to come to a TXNORML meeting? Great. All right. Please come up to us and talk to us afterwards. We love talking about this stuff, and we're really happy that you came out here to Flamingo Cantina, and we want to say thank you to Flamingo Cantina for hosting us now for so many meetings in a row. I don't even know how many it is. I just want folks to turn around and say hi to the folks that are saying that they're the first timers. This is all about getting this movement going. We really are on a tidal wave of actual change. It's not something that I would have said 4 years ago or maybe even 2 years ago, but we really are seeing change. We've got a table of merchandise. If anybody wants shirts or to actually become a member, you don't have to be a member, but obviously every little bit helps. We appreciate all of that. Even if you're not a member, you can sign up for the newsletter, find out about all our other events. After I'm done speaking, a little bit about the marijuana-related news over the last month. We're going to have a special guest speaker, very, very exciting. Bill Norton is here. He's actually the co-founder of TXNORML from back in the 1970s. And he's going to come up here and tell us a little bit about the history, the initial history, back when marijuana, even tiny amounts, was a felony offense in Texas. So you think we've got a steep mountain to climb that we're climbing now? We've already made some progress, obviously, and Bill's going to be up here to talk to us about that. We've got handouts as well, so please inform yourself about us. And again, we're really happy that you're here. So to sort of dive into the news, here's something that's kind of up my alley. It was a team of researchers from the United States and Poland that actually finally did some evidence-based studies about drug-sniffing dogs. And it turns out that when you study this scientifically, that there are a lot of flaws in this idea that the police can bring Rover out and all of a sudden identify when there either is or isn't marijuana or some other type of illegal narcotic there. In fact, what the study found was that the trained, certified dogs are most likely to provide false alerts in situations involving the search of a motor vehicle. They studied it in several different ways. When a dog was searching a room or a house, or when they were searching a vehicle. And a lot of y'all have had to suffer through my Ask a Lawyer sessions, and you'll know that from those, that most stops, most of the folks that I see that come into my office were stopped when they were driving a vehicle. So it's actually kind of scary to know that the absolute lowest percentages of, well, the highest percentages of false alerts, and also, I guess there's some up here, in the car situation, they were least likely to detect an illegal narcotic. But basically, when they mimicked real-world traffic stops, which is where most of the problems come from when you're talking about being involved in the criminal justice system on a marijuana case, they were far less reliable than had previously been thought. Now, to go off on a little side note here, the problem for a particular person that has had a drug dog come out and Rover barked, so the police officer said, well, that gives me probable cause to search your car, is essentially, you don't become my client, you don't have an arrest unless they actually find the dope. So what unfortunately is really lacking is the statistics behind all the times that people have a drug dog brought out and then nothing is found. Because in the courtroom, to the judge and the prosecutor, it looks like these things are really reliable, right? I mean, if they didn't find marijuana, you wouldn't be there. So we're starting to learn more about that, and it has already been ruled almost 10 years ago by the United States Supreme Court that when Rover barks and when the police officer testifies, Rover is a certified drug-sniffing dog, that's probable cause for them to search your car. All right, so on to the next one. In Maryland, there was a poll, and the majority of folks in Maryland believe that regulations on recreational marijuana should be no more strict than the regulations for booze. 57% believe that regulations overseeing the use and sale of cannabis should not be stricter than those regulations presently governing alcohol, according to this poll. And just over 50% of Marylanders actually said that they support making the use of marijuana legal versus 39% who oppose the idea. And respondents were more supportive of the notion of legalizing cannabis for therapeutic purposes, or what we often call medicinal marijuana. In Maryland, that's now getting 90% support. And I'm actually a little bit going to talk off my notes about a really interesting Pew Research study that came out today. We see a lot of polls just asking people, do you favor decriminalization, reducing penalties, medicinal marijuana only, complete legalization? But we're actually starting to see that the tide is turning in a way that they're asking more and new and interesting questions, and I'll get to that in a little bit. In New York, in a Wall Street Journal NBC News poll, folks were asked to rank tobacco, alcohol, sugar, and marijuana in the order that they believe them to be most harmful. Almost the majority, 49%, said tobacco, followed by alcohol at 24%, and sugar beat out marijuana at 15%.
Yeah!
And the reason that I put this in here is, I mean, you know, I come to these meetings and I'm preaching to the choir. We all know that tobacco and alcohol and even sugar and chicken fried steak is more dangerous than marijuana. But it's encouraging to know that there are folks out there that are not only asking these questions, but they are publishing the results on NBC News and getting the news out there so that we can combat some of these myths that we're trying to overcome. And of course, under federal law, marijuana is a Schedule I controlled substance, which means it's as dangerous as heroin and obviously much more dangerous than sugar, so that tells you where the feds are on this. Super interesting study out of Washington, D.C. from the RAND researchers. While marijuana use rose from 2006 to 2010, the consumption of cocaine and methamphetamine fell. A rise in the self-reported consumption of cannabis during those years corresponded with a significant decline in Americans' use of cocaine and methamphetamine during this same time period, according to a new RAND study commissioned by the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy. So maybe that is a positive step towards getting that particular federal agency to stop lying about marijuana and to recognize that basically human beings have always found ways of intoxicating themselves in one way or another. In fact, in one society or another, pretty much every substance that can intoxicate you in one way or another has both been legal or illegal at some place or some time. But this is, if we see more studies like this, if we can actually show, and unfortunately I'm going to go off on one of my pet peeves here, These sorts of studies do not show a causal connection between an increase in marijuana use and a decrease in other types of illicit controlled substances. But even though it's illogical to believe that there is a causal connection between those two, or at least that this study proves that there's a causal connection, again, when these studies are broadcast to the public, that's the sort of thing that brings support to our movement to completely legalize marijuana in Texas. The study went on to talk about the fact that about 4.5 million Americans have tried heroin in their lifetimes, and by comparison, about 12 million Americans have tried methamphetamines, 37.5 million have tried cocaine. Anybody want to guess a number for a number of Americans that have consumed cannabis? Just shout out a number for me. 300 million would be nice. Maybe all our problems would be over. 111 million at least are admitting it, and I bet that nowadays most people are admitting that they've used it. There's always a problem in these polling data that they say they try to factor out, people saying that they haven't used it when they really have. But 111 million users is a lot of users, and it's one of the reasons that we're going to win this movement. Between 2000 and 2010, Americans were estimated to have spent $1 trillion on the purchase of cocaine, heroin, marijuana, and methamphetamine. I don't know that that means anything particularly, but I thought that was interesting. Okay, now on to some medical marijuana news. A lot of times that we are up here with an actual scientific survey that actually does tend to show a causal relationship, you may have noticed that it comes out of Israel. And that's because the Israeli government has a very good and progressive and scientific-minded way of thinking about these things, unlike, unfortunately, our own federal government. They believe that before they call marijuana the devil weed, they should actually study it to see whether or not it does any good. And in fact, a recent study out of Israel shows that inhaled cannabis relieves symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Inhaling whole plant cannabis provides symptomatic relief in patients with Parkinson's disease, according to observational trial data published in the March-April edition of the journal Clinical Neuropharmacology. And Parkinson's is a progressive disorder of the central nervous system that results in tremors and slow movement and muscle rigidity. And it actually helps these patients and relieves them of their symptoms. And we can point to this as something that shows that we're not just on this for recreational, not that there's anything wrong with that, but we're not just in this for the recreational uses, but that there are legitimate scientific uses as well. They evaluated Parkinson's disease symptoms in 22 patients at baseline and then 30 minutes after inhaling cannabis. And there was significant improvement after the marijuana treatment, and they do call it treatment in the study, of tremor, rigidity, and something called bradykinesia, which is a slowness of movement, I'm told, when I cut and paste this off the internet. And there was also significant improvement of sleep and pain scores. And I'm sure if any of y'all know folks that use medical marijuana legitimately for these sorts of reasons, you hear these sorts of anecdotes from the people that do that. But more important than anecdotes is hundreds and thousands and eventually tens of thousands of anecdotes starts to become data that we can point to when we are having our lobby day and we are going to meet with the legislature and the legislators and trying to show them why they should support either of the two bills that we typically have in front of them. The study concluded that they were the first to report an amelioration of both motor and non-motor symptoms in patients with Parkinson's disease treated with cannabis. And they concluded that it opened new venues for treatment strategies in Parkinson's. And so any hope for Parkinson's patients is good news for all of us. Now, speaking about our federal government and the unfortunate lies that they've told throughout the decades about marijuana and actual scientific data changing people's minds, some of y'all probably remember two things about Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Number one, that in 2009 in Time magazine he wrote an article called something like "Why I Do Not Support Medicinal Marijuana." I don't think I have that exactly right, but you folks know what I'm talking about, right? And then, of course, last year, there was quite a buzz when Dr. Gupta came out and said, you know, I made a really, really big mistake. I assumed that the initial classification as a Schedule I drug was justified. I assumed that they would only do that if they had data. And the mistake that I made when I wrote that article in 2009 is I didn't look at it myself. And not only have I gone and met some of these patients, but I've looked into the science even more. So we remember when he did that. Well, from Sanjay Gupta this month, I am doubling down on medical marijuana. CNN Chief Medical Correspondent Dr. Sanjay Gupta is doubling down in his advocacy for patients to have legal access to cannabis as a therapeutic agent. He's featured on CNN. Yeah, clapping for that's great. All right. I believe it was last Wednesday, he wrote another article on the CNN website and said, I am more convinced than ever that it is irresponsible to not provide the best care we can. Care that often may involve marijuana. I am not backing down on medical marijuana. I am doubling down. All right. New Mexico, as the states, we're starting to see some really interesting things coming out of all the different states that have gone just a little further ahead than Texas has and had some form of medicinal marijuana or decriminalization or sale and the types of regulations that they're doing. New Mexico announced that they are going to expand their state's medical cannabis program. State Health Secretary Retta Ward accepted an advisory board's recommendation to expand the state's existing list of qualifying conditions for which cannabis may be recommended to include Huntington's disease, and then maybe not coincidentally based on what we just talked about, also to include Parkinson's disease. They're also seeking to increase the number of plants that licensed producers may legally produce at one time from 150 total cannabis plants and seedlings to 150 mature plants and 300 seedlings. As of right now, there are only 23 individuals in New Mexico that are licensed to produce medical cannabis, but the department is anticipating to seek applications from as many as 12 more additional producers. And this is actually, we're talking about states that are ahead of us. It was in 2009 that New Mexico actually became the first state to license producers of medical cannabis. So to see them expand that program basically means that it's been a success, except that there's not enough supply. Although, just as on a personal note, I think that, going from 23 to 35, I think we could probably still have some more producers in New Mexico eventually. All right. In Michigan, state regulators have agreed to allow physicians to authorize cannabis therapy for patients with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Members, yeah, let's hear it. And for the folks that is their first meeting, I probably should have said what people's titles were, but please seek out Dave Bass, our Veterans Liaison. Obviously, there is a great connection. PTSD is not limited to veterans, but some of the successes that we had at the legislature last session, I attribute to Dave's work and bringing other veterans into the offices of legislators and having them show up to testify at hearings. Those 4, 6, 8, 10 years ago, we were kind of a joke in the legislature. Well, guess what? You bring in a veteran that says, you know, marijuana is better for me than these opioids or other types of prescription medications that dope me up in a way that I don't like and don't allow me to function, and you actually get taken seriously. In Michigan, members of their medical marijuana review panel voted 6-2 to expand the state's list of qualifying conditions to include PTSD, and the director signed off on the recommendation. That's their next step in the process. There's always several layers of review. And this is the first time that Michigan has expanded their list of qualifying conditions since 2008, when physician-authorized use of cannabis first became allowable in Michigan. And so it became the 7th state. Connecticut, Delaware, Maine, New Mexico, Nevada, and Oregon also explicitly allow for the use of cannabis for PTSD. And on that same subject, the upcoming issue of Molecular Psychiatry has an article that theorizes that cannabinoid-based therapies would likely comprise the next generation of evidence-based treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder. So we're seeing a lot of movement and work in that area, and it's going to be good for veterans and others as well. In Indiana, lawmakers approved legislation this month to reclassify hemp as an agricultural commodity. And House and Senate lawmakers in Indiana have both signed off on the legislation to reclassify and regulate industrial hemp. The Senate initially approved the legislation by a vote. There were 48 people in the Senate. Who wants to guess what the vote was out of the 48 people? Obviously, you need at least 25, 23. Anybody want to guess? 48 people. I hear 46. 48-0. You often find that there are even stranger, weirder, I'll just say it, stupider people in a House than there are in a Senate. They only approved it 93-4. But that's still good. The measure reclassifies cannabis possessing less than 0.3% THC as an industrial crop, and it also laid out licensing requirements and regulations for it. Of course, that's the really silly thing about hemp, as everybody knows. A lot of the history of marijuana criminalization is our puritanical streak that we don't like people to have fun. Well, you can't have that sort of fun with hemp anyway. I mean, 0.3% THC, but anyway. All right. In the District of Columbia, the City Council finalizes the vote, I believe this was last Wednesday, decriminalizing pot possession offenses. District lawmakers voted 10-1 in favor of, and this was the title of it, the Simple Possession of Small Quantities of Marijuana Decriminalization Amendment Act of 2013. I believe, can anybody tell me if I'm right, that I saw that today, was it the mayor? I'm not sure exactly. Somebody, the next level after that has signed off on it today. And then DC legally is this weird sort of federal / they sort of have their own, I don't quite understand how it works. It's the same way that the feds can come into Texas and tell us what to do. They actually have even more authority over the District of Columbia. There is something like a 60-day waiting period where Congress can do one of 3 things. They can either explicitly approve it because it's a change to the DC laws, and that would be good. They could disapprove it, unfortunately. Or they could do nothing. And 2 out of those 3 are good, because if they do nothing, which seems right now politically to be the most likely thing, then in 60 days, that will become law. Oh, and as a side note, The ACLU of Maryland reported that DC possesses the highest percentage of marijuana possession arrests per capita in the nation. So, and you know, talk to me afterwards about it, but I think we know why that is as well. It goes to other problems that we have with our marijuana laws. All right. In Ohio, the majority of voters back legalizing marijuana. Most voters support, this was another poll, most voters support regulating the adult use of cannabis, while the supermajority endorses legalizing the plant for medicinal purposes, according to a Quinnipiac University poll. 51% said that allowing adults in Ohio to legally possess small amounts, that they would support that. 44% opposed that idea. In age, from 18 to 29-year-olds, 72% supported it. And that reminds me, if any of our newcomers or any of our regulars are not registered to vote, we will help you with that. Please register to vote. It's incredibly important. The problem, some of the problems we have with getting the legislation passed that we're trying to get passed is, let's face it, young folks just don't vote in the same numbers that, I'm just going to say it, the old fogies do, okay? And so that slows the rate of progress on this. So please, we will be happy to help you register to vote, let you know what you need to do on that. Support is also, for whatever reason, lower among women, among Republicans, and then it's lowest of all in those over the age of 65.
Yeah, the Senior Alliance, though.
And the Senior Alliance is working on that as well. In California, there's been a call for legalizing marijuana for adults, and Democrats have approved a plank in the California Party platform calling for the legalization of marijuana. I don't see our board member Amy here tonight. I don't know if she's here. She's also working on that. If any of y'all want to come up and talk to us about that, or about doing it for the Republican Party, this isn't a party issue. We'll take any kind of support that we can get. Please let us know. We are working on that in Texas as well. We can use your help in getting that done. The Democrats had a 3-day convention in LA, and they gave almost unanimous approval for, and I'm going to quote it, to support the legalization, regulation, and taxation of marijuana in a manner similar to that of tobacco or alcohol. Anybody know who Jerry Brown is? Or, well, I mean, of course he's famous again, but he's been famous for a long time. I was actually a little bit surprised by this. One of the things that I remember about Jerry Brown growing up was that I believe Linda Ronstadt lived with him in the California, whatever their equivalent of the governor's mansion is. Jerry Brown is very much against this, so, and he's a Democrat, so that shows that this is not a Democrat versus Republican issue. It's something that we all need to work on, but it's good that the California Democratic Party made it an official plank of their platform. All right. Obviously, the biggest success recently anywhere in terms of our ultimate goal is Colorado. Retail sales of cannabis in Colorado in the month of January yielded an estimated $3.5 million in state tax revenues, according to financial data released online this week by the Colorado Department of Revenue. Colorado is also going through sort of an interesting, if I remember this correctly, deal where there's a difference between what sort of cannabis producer you are and what sort of rate that you pay. There's been some infighting in Colorado about what should be done with that. I belong to the National NORML lawyers, well, I can't remember what it's called, but there's a listserv of NORML lawyers all over the country, and you know, I kind of hate to see them bicker about details when, you know, we're sitting here in Texas, and I'll take a 15% tax on marijuana any day. Anybody else out there? All right, and don't forget that's a way to sell it to people, really to legislators. One of the things that we found on our lobby day was that, of course, every legislator is on the farming committee or the health committee or the education committee, and you go to them and you say, wouldn't it be great to be able to free up this money for, and then you just fill in the blank whatever their particular pet project is. The farmers, the teachers, whatever. It's a really good way of trying to convince people that that money is real money, to be used for other things. All right. One last thing that I don't have written on this is I saw a poll today, and I alluded to it. It either came out yesterday or it came out today. And as I was talking about, we see a lot of polls about do you support decriminalization or just medical or those sorts of things. Well, they did that in this poll, but they asked what to me was a new and much more interesting question. They asked folks whether they opposed or supported marijuana legalization, whether or not they believed that eventually marijuana would become fully legal in all states. And it was somewhere between 75 to 80% of folks believed what we've been preaching here for some time, and that the tidal wave of change is coming, and that yes, folks believe it's going to happen. And I was part of the problem. Maybe not 2 years ago, but 4 years ago or 6 years ago, I would have said, at least privately, Texas is going to be the last state that's going to legalize marijuana, because it seemed like such an uphill battle. And the reason I think that it's so important is not because these are the supporters of it. Yes, they believe that it would eventually become legal as well. But when those who oppose our cause also say that they know it's coming no matter what they do, that's going to reduce their energy and the time and effort that they put into fighting this eventually. Resistance is futile. We are winning this battle. We know we're winning this battle. We're just trying to do it as quickly as we can, and we appreciate all of the support we get from all of y'all every month and on all of our other events. I'll be coming up in a little bit later to talk about what our upcoming events are, but for right now I'm really excited to introduce Bill Norton. Bill can tell you more about it, but I believe his involvement in TXNORML started, well, more than 40 years ago? Something like 40 years ago. Here is the co-founder of TXNORML, Bill Norton. Please give him a hand.
Thank you very much. Can y'all hear me?
Bring a little closer.
A little closer, more like this. Right. I'm not sure if the co-founder of TXNORML is quite right, maybe a little generous, but it's as good a title as I can come up with. I've certainly been involved for a very long time. Well, really, since NORML was around, shortly after NORML was around. I'll get into that in a minute. I've been doing some homework because I couldn't remember really all the details from 40 years ago. I hope you'll forgive me. But I wanted to give you some kind of background into what the laws in Texas have been over the past 100 or so years. It has evolved in the wrong way, though. So in 1905 was this first state law dealing with drugs, and marijuana wasn't even mentioned. 1919 was the first time it was mentioned, and it was a misdemeanor for non-medical, for transfer of non-medical marijuana for non-medical purposes. And I thought it was an interesting phrase because that means that all the way back then in 1919 they recognized that it had a medicinal quality to it. Still, it was a misdemeanor. It didn't really, things got kind of serious after Prohibition was winding down, and y'all may know this story. Mary Ann Slater was the director of the Bureau of He's in charge of busting all the speakeasies and everything. But his alcohol prohibition was about to end. He realized that he was going to be out of a job pretty soon, so he needed to find something else. Some sort of demon drug that he could keep him well paid. And marijuana was the perfect drug for that. It was unknown, so you could make up stories about it. And the people who were using it were mostly migrant workers down in the valley who didn't vote and so had no power, and they were an easy target. So starting in the 30s, civil possession was a felony, up to 5 years, with fines of $2,000. That wasn't good enough, and they kept jacking it up every time, every chance they could, to the point where in 1955, civil possession became a felony to life. Subsequent offenses were 10 years to life. That was not just for show. I mean, people were really getting life sentences. I think there were, in 1971, there were 13 people serving life sentences in Texas for possession of marijuana. So, my story, personal story, starts in about 1968 when I was a senior in Moreland High School in Moreland, Texas. You're not from Moreland?
I'm talking about it.
Oh, yeah.
Falls County.
Yeah, all right. Go find bulldogs. The Moreland's a little town, rural town, southeast of Waco. Very conservative, very traditionally Southern. And in 1968, as one historian put it, everything was changing. We were coming off of political assassinations. The Beatles had changed the culture. Civil rights was in full flower. Women's rights were just taking hold. There was a war in Vietnam. And there were these drugs that everybody was talking about. So for a kid in high school, the world outside of Moreland was sort of scary and exciting at the same time. In particular, this marijuana thing was something that piqued my interest, and it sounded like it could be kind of fun, even though they tried their best to make it sound like it was the weed from Satan's garden. I was curious about it. But in Moreland, Texas, in 1968, there was no pot to be found, at least among my circle of friends. But that's when I graduated and came to UT, and it was a very different environment for me. The diversity was amazing. It was almost like a different country in a lot of ways. And within a couple of weeks, I had made friends with some people from down in the valley, and they had plenty of pot to share with me. And so within 2 weeks of coming to the big city, I had my first experience getting high, which meant I committed the first felony in my life. And I was just happy as I could be about it. It was just as fun as it could be. And I thought, well, maybe I can get some. So I asked them, I said, can I get some of this stuff? And they said, sure. It's $10 a lid. And I said, $10 a lid? What's a lid? And they said, it's an ounce. And I said, okay, an ounce. Well, I didn't know how much an ounce was. It's 1/16 of a pound. The only thing I had to compare it with, though, was the smallest weight that you can put on a barbell is 1 1/4 pounds, So I'm thinking, all right, that's about a 20th. An ounce would be about a 20th of that. So, okay. And, in my stone state, I was trying to do this calculation in my head, and I was getting nowhere with it. So finally I had to ask, okay, well, what is an ounce? And then they pulled out the bag and showed me this is what we're talking about. And so that $10, that's a pretty good deal. What's the go for these days? How much? A gram is more than that?
Yeah, that's a good.
Yeah. Well, people usually. Yeah, it's a bird, yeah. People often ask me when I tell them that, I say, well, was it any good? And I said, I don't know. I didn't know. I didn't have any benchmark. You know, it got me high, and that was the main thing. So that was 1968. And you have to understand that marijuana is really coming of age at that point. Whereas in '68, nobody in Moreland had any pot. By 1969, everybody did. A complete turnaround. And because everybody was smoking it, not just the migrant workers in the valley, a lot of these nice middle-class kids were getting arrested. And that changed people's attitudes a lot. You know, when the neighbor next door, or the homecoming queen got arrested for pot, it made people take notice. So in 1971, the Texas legislature met, they knew something had to change. And there are 6 marijuana bills proposed in that session. One of them, which was proposed by a guy named Walter Mad Dog Meaden, invoked the death penalty for possession of more than 5 grams. Going the wrong direction still. The only bill that really had any legs was one that had been written by Raul Longoria from the Valley. And it sort of teetered on the brink of passing, but at the very last moment it died. So in 1971, we were where we were before, looking at 2 years to life felony for possession of any amount. And as I said, one of the concerns among the population at large was that the wrong people were getting arrested at this point, to the point where juries weren't even convicting anymore. There's a story came out of the Valley about this taxi driver who was arrested for possession of 134 pounds of pot. And his trial, apparently his lawyer thought it'd be a good idea to put him on the stand, and he essentially admitted to everything that he was charged with. But the jury still acquitted him, simply because they hated the law, and they weren't going to convict somebody like that. The judge was furious. Let me read his comment. The enraged judge said that in his 20 years on the bench, he had never seen such a stupid, illogical, and ill-advised verdict. And he would see to it that none of the jurors would ever serve in his court again. So, not only did you let somebody go free, you were off jury duty for the rest of your life. I think they're pretty happy about that. So, that's really when NORML got started, and when I got involved in it. I remember driving around and beat up 1963 Volkswagen Beetle, talking to my girlfriend and saying, you know, somebody needs to form a lobbying group to address this. And it needs to be very professional. It needs to be fact-based, evidence-based, reason-based, and address the political philosophies behind it, and also the symbolism. By that time, you come to symbolize the typical pot smoker was, you know, the hippie. The hippies were scared back then. They were radicals and they were against the law and all this stuff. So I knew we had to fight that symbolism also. Well, it turned out that I was the only one with that vision. Keith Strop was a couple of years older than I was, and a couple of years ahead of me, and vastly more connected than I was, and he had already started the organization in 1970. So I was, one day I was reading Playboy, and I noticed this ad for this organization called NORML. And it was slick, it was professional, it used that word, reform, National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana. Laws. And I thought that was significant because, it was, legalization is what we kind of talked about, but this was a little subtle, and it sort of told me that this was an organization that knew what they were doing. I said, this is exactly what I'm talking about, and I went about to find if there was anybody in Texas, and there was. One of the first things that Keith Strock did, one of the first places that he focused his attention was Texas because it had such horrific laws, and it had the only, I think at the time, it was the only one that were still felony. And to the life, it's pretty serious stuff. So he had contact, he and Steve Simon, he lives here in Austin, still around, were in contact with each other, along with Jerry Goldstein, who's an attorney from San Antonio. And I think he may still be on the board of advisories. Do y'all know him? I saw his name as one of the attorneys somehow listed on some of your recent literature.
NORML Legal Committee.
There you go, NORML Legal Committee. So he's still around. So he came down here and met with those guys and got NORML started, and so I had to kind of catch up with them sometime after that. So I was in UT at the time, and I became, I guess, what you would call today the student outreach coordinator. I was sort of the UT contact, and we'd set up our booths on the West Mall and had literature. NORML's always been sort of a literature-centric organization. I mean, facts, studies, all of that stuff is our bread and butter. And it was back then also. But also wanted to sort of give us our own identity. So I designed a couple of t-shirts. This is one of them. This may look familiar to some of you. This is the other one. This is my favorite, really. This, you may not know it, but this is based on the Great Seal of the state of Texas, except Texas has nothing but oak branch and a pecan branch going around instead of female marijuana leaf. That was sort of my job, just to get out the word to students. And I have to credit Steve Simon. He was an extremely effective lobbyist. He was down there all the time, passing out literature and getting things done. And really, he's probably up here instead of me, but he's not. So that brings us to about 1972. By then, it was obvious something had to happen. It hadn't happened in the last legislative session. Something had to happen. And a fellow named Griffin Smith really was the instigator of getting a commission together, much like the Schaefer Commission. Are y'all familiar with the Schaefer Commission? Yeah, it was a commission appointed by Richard Nixon to study marijuana to see what should be done about it, and they did an extensive study, wrote a 200-page book, and basically they slapped down all the talking points about it being a gateway drug, about it being addictive, about it being all these evil things, and they recommended at the end of it that it should be decriminalized. That was at the national level. So This commission was done at the state level, and it addressed really more than marijuana, it's just all drugs, but marijuana is the main one that we're looking at. They said even though they had all these witnesses come to their meetings, and even witnesses that were scheduled to speak on something else, education or heroin or anything else, is that everybody wanted to talk about marijuana. And that was the one thing that they all felt absolutely had to be changed. And in the end, that commission as well recommended a decriminalization of the marijuana. One of the final comments in their report was this. Let me read it to you. No witness who has appeared on our hearings has offered any rational explanation of why a jail sentence is an appropriate sentence for such behavior. Smoke a pot. And we do not believe that such an explanation can be made. To continue to justify a jail sentence would conceal the fact that our existing marijuana laws have been a brutal and tragic error. That's pretty strong language from a politically aware study committee. So, armed with that, we go into the 1973 legislative committee session with generally called the Kennard bill or the Brooks-Baker bill, which was basically take the Kennard committee recommendations and write a law around it. But the new governor, Dolph Briscoe, had his own ideas about what should be done, and so those two bills sort of clashed. And they fought about it through the entire session, and eventually it was worked out in a conference committee. And that's where we got it may still be the same law. 2 ounces or less, 180 days, 2 to 4 ounces up to a year, and a $2,000 fine. Is that what it still is? Yeah.
First level, then you would know. What? He said yes, right. That's where it is.
That's right. So that was done in 1973.
So everybody knows current laws on the back of the TXNORML brochure.
73 was when we got that law changed. What year is it now?
Way too late.
And the reaction was, it was a mixed reaction. I think those who supported marijuana law decriminalization or marijuana law reform were really disappointed. In retrospect, I think we were crazy to be disappointed. We should have been high-fiving because we went from the state of the worst law to one of the best ones. There were some that had decriminalized, and that's what we were shooting for, but we didn't get it. While we were disappointed, some conservatives sort of freaked out. Let me read you one quote. Waylon Simmons of San Antonio, talking to his fellow legislators who had passed this comprehensive drug law. People in your districts are not going to be able to hold enough jobs to buy toasters and television sets to put them in their houses for the burglars who shoot heroin to steal. So the hysteria was still strong. So that's 1973. 74 and 76. There was a real sense of optimism. You know, other states were decriminalizing. Things were looking good. We didn't get decriminalization. We figured just keep plugging away. It's going to happen. NORML was strong. It was recognized nationally. Decriminalization as a concept was endorsed by just about everybody who studied it. American Medical Association, American Bar Association, National Council of Churches, individuals like William Buckley, Ann Landers, and Art Linkletter. Y'all know those guys? Yeah. These were very conservative people. And most importantly, perhaps, we had Jimmy Carter, who had, as a candidate, had endorsed decriminalization, and as president, continued to endorse it. His
the equivalent of a drug czar was Peter Bourne, who's a good friend of Keith Strauss. So NORML had contacts in the White House at this point. And things were looking just very good for us. And here at the local level, Willie Nelson gave TXNORML its own office in the Texas Opry House. Just one of their little, actually it was an old apartment, I guess is what it was. But we had our own office there. And we had this great grand opening. I'll show you some pictures from it. You probably can't see it, but by the way, here's a picture of me in high school, voted the outstanding citizen of my senior class. And I'm still an outstanding citizen. And I was most outstanding when I was involved in TXNORML, because that's what good citizens do. They get out and they see something wrong and they try to change it. So, you know, you're all very good citizens, you know, and don't let them tell you otherwise. So here is here's a picture of Keith Strauss, Jerry Goldstein, who is the legal guy, and then me on the far left. And this probably just a big board on you guys. And this was done. This meeting was done at the Texas in the Cactus Cafe, the Texas Union. Like a bunch of our followers. Wait a minute. Here's a picture of the NORML offices. Little delivering marijuana signs in the window. And here's me operating the phone with the TXNORML t-shirts in the background, doing my thing. Alright, so that's what was happening in the local. Marco Rubio. 1976, 77, everything was looking good, things were happening, and then the wheels started to come off. It's funny how some little insignificant incident can snowball into something that is way bigger than it ever should have. So Peter Bourne, remember him? He was Jimmy Carter's drug czar. He was a doctor. And a woman that he came up to him and said, "Man, I'm just freaking out. Work is killing me. I'm anxious. I can't sleep." He recommended seeing a psychiatrist. She didn't want to because she's afraid it would affect her government job. So he wrote her a prescription for Preludes, but she didn't want her name to get out, so he used an alias. When actually a friend of hers went down to have the prescription filled, it just so happened that a state pharmacy inspector happened to be at the pharmacy. He asked for her ID. She didn't have it with the proper name. She was arrested. Came back to Peter Bourne, and suddenly the whole marijuana movement was sort of on its back heels in defensive mode. And Keith may reacted badly to this. He was sort of angry at Peter Bourne to begin with because he hadn't quite followed through with his decriminalization promises. And so Keith allowed a story about Peter Bourne snorting cocaine at a NORML party in 1977. He let it leak out. Once that happened, everything started falling apart. Peter Bourne had to resign. Nobody in the Carter administration wanted to go anywhere near marijuana reform at all. Remember, into his administration, they had the Iran hostage situation and marijuana reform was just not going to make it up with the priorities. So that sort of killed that. There's a lot of, within NORML itself, there was a crisis of leadership at that point, I guess it's fair to say. Strock eventually had to resign. And that sort of became the dark ages for NORML, especially for me, because at the same time things were happening in my life. I was getting married, I was starting a career. Just the prospects of any sort of reform seemed to be pretty dismal at that point. So I just sort of, over time, drifted away from it, you know. And it became something in my past and just sort of receded into the background. And I almost forgot. So that was early 80s. So fast forward to 2013, April of 2013. Now I've got a couple of kids. I've got one in the Marines, one's in high school still, and my younger son and some of his buddies taught me into going to Marley Fest with them. So I was there at Marley Fest wearing my TXNORML t-shirt. I thought I'd, kind of get into the spirit of things. And as I was standing there, sort of overlooking the crowd and thinking about how it looked exactly like it used to be when I was younger, I noticed at the corner of my eye, this guy strided across the crowd. They're all seated in blankets, and he's wearing this big TXNORML t-shirt. Just like that one right there. Can you stand up? And I said, whoa! I said, I recognized that, and I was shocked, and I didn't know that TXNORML was even still around. And I immediately recognized, at least the design had been updated a little bit, but it was clearly, I knew where it came from, so I ran up to the guy and said, where'd you get that t-shirt? And he said, what was it, TXNORML tent right over there. And so I hustled on over there, and that's where I met up with Josh and all these other guys with TXNORML, and I was absolutely blown away by what they had done. I mean, when I was involved in TXNORML early on, calling it an organization was sort of kind. It was basically just a bunch of people, volunteers, doing what they could. We didn't really have any hierarchy or anything like that.
It's still the same!
Well, at least normally you have a hierarchy. They had this booth that was well staffed. They had just the whole organization was just blew me away. And they've been so welcoming to me, this old relic from the past. They've welcomed me into their organization sort of as a, the old guy giving the history of it, as I'm doing tonight. And I'm just, I'm so pleased that after 40 years, well, I'm not pleased that after 40 years we still have to do this. That is mind-boggling. When I think about that, that kid me in college driving around in his Volkswagen, thinking about changing the marijuana laws, I wonder what he would have thought if somebody had told him, man, you're going to grow old and have kids, and the millennium is going to come and go, and it's still not going to be legal. Not even decriminalized. People are still going to jail for it. I can't imagine what he would have thought. In fact, I can't imagine, I can't wrap my head around it still. But, as Jamie said, these should be heady days for you guys. Things are happening. There seems to be a very big change in the zeitgeist. People are acknowledging like it or not, it's going to happen. And I think the comparisons to gay marriage are not overstated. Just like gay marriage, there was this huge resistance, and then there came a point where we said, all right, we can deal with it. And there's just a fundamental change in people's attitudes. So I think that's what's happening right now. So all that bad news I was giving you about the 80s, forget it. That's done. We're in a new era now, and I think things are happening. In 5 years is what you think? I don't think that's unrealistic. I don't think something. Yeah! 2017, I think that's very realistic. So, you guys, thank you so much for coming out. So thank you for contributing to the cause. And I'll be hanging around here. If you have any questions, just feel free to come up and ask. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Bill, and please do approach him and take a look at some of the memorabilia he has there. It's awesome, great stuff, and it was really fun to hear Josh talking about him coming up at last Reggae Fest. I'm going to, we want to get the comedians up here. I'm going to kind of go through the upcoming events fairly quickly, but we actually, you can follow us on Facebook. I think we have we don't have anything at the table, okay. But you can find out about all these online. I forgot to give a shout out to Greg. I believe he's here. He's our Director of Athletics this Sunday at 7:30 a.m., which is all of our favorite time, right? You can join Team Hope Through Cannabis for the largest 10K in Texas. Come on out for the Capital 10K this Sunday. And then Jax is going to be at the Libertarian State Convention. She'll be speaking on April 12th on, I love this title, Drugs, Data, and the Dominatrix Panel. The Senior Alliance is going to be having a meeting on April 12th at 2 at Opal Divines down south. There's going to be a strategy meeting on April 16th. And this isn't in my notes, but Dave Bass told me earlier tonight that just today for those of y'all that don't know, Reggae Fest is being moved. We are approved once again to have our table and our tent at Reggae Fest, so we will be out there. That's going to start April 18th is the Friday, and then 420 will be that Sunday. Our annual Texas Marijuana March and Rally is going to be Saturday, May 3rd. And then the next open monthly meeting, we hope to see, especially you new guys back, is once again, of course, at the Flamingo Cantina. First Wednesday of every month is May 7th. You've got to come see our guest speaker, Kinky Friedman. If he hadn't gone, he came to our Activist Day, thank you. And if he hadn't gone into writing books and writing songs and smoking pot with Willie Nelson and becoming a politician, he could have been a stand-up comedian too. He was awesome. And then the monthly meeting after that will be June 4th, and our special speaker will be Heather Fazio, who's the new Texas Political Director for the Marijuana Policy Project. There are other organizations in Texas that are working on the same things, and unlike some states, we are working with those other organizations because we all have the same goal. And last, I want to give a shout out to the Texas Veterans Summit. It's going to be July 18th at the Carver. Well, there's a pre-party on July 18th here at Flamingo, and then the actual summit, I think, is July 19th. Please check us out online. Please come up and talk to any of us. We want to talk with all of you. Thank you so much for coming up.
Morning when my work is over, I'll fly away home. Lord, what bright morning when my work is over, I will fly away home. One bright morning when my work is over, I'll fly